Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We are exploring the pre-Islamic Arabia, and we have come to a point where we want to talk about the religious similarities between the Hindus and the Buddhists of India and the Arabs, the pagan Arabs in the pre-Islamic era. Well, there are a lot of things that we want to discuss today, and we'll be sharing some maps with you. We hope that it is a good learning experience for all of you. So, according to the historians like Allama Abdul Karim Shahrastani, who wrote the book Al-Malali wa Nahl, and also in another book, Ara'i al-Arabi fil Jahiliyyah, it is quite evident that initially both Hindus as well as the Arabs were exploring nature, were looking at things that would benefit them. But over the period of time, this turned into idol worshipping. They started associating some of the benefits that they would be gaining to certain things. As a result, from China all the way to Arabia, that includes India, Afghanistan, Iran, Uzbekistan, and the Arabian Peninsula, there were 7 temples that were regarded to be the biggest temples of the idol worshippers. If you start looking into the works of Mas'udi, who is a famous historian, he writes that these 7 temples were scattered as sab'a. These were 7 haykals, which were the temples. One of them was dedicated to the star Saturn, which is called Zuhl, and it was believed by the people of those times who used to look up to these 7 temples that the Kaba represents the house of Zuhl. And it has been around for such a long time because it is associated with Zuhl, which is Saturn. And that is the Saturn that gives it so much power. Now, this evil thought or this misthought came into Arabs way later on. But as we know, as believers, as Muslims, that Kaaba was in existence even at the time of Adam alayhi salam. When he came, at that time, the angels had already built the Kaaba. And Adam alayhi salam reconstructed it. Because thousands of years had passed, probably Kaaba needed to be reconstructed. And I have given you an entire lecture on it, that when exactly historically we believe that Kaaba was reconstructed from Adam alayhi salam onwards. So that video is also available to you in detail. Well, not going to go in the details today. And then after Adam alayhi salam, it was reconstructed at the time of Ibrahim alayhi salam. So anyway, over the period of time, when in the pre-Islamic Arabia, in the Jahiliyyah time frame, when Arabs went into idol worshiping and they became pagans, this idea also crept into the society, especially in the Meccan society, where they tried associating the Kaaba with Zuhl. Not everybody, but there were people in that region. If it was everybody, then Abdul Muttalib would have never said to Abraha that this house, Kaaba, is the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he will protect it. But just so that you know, one of the temples that was, it was an understanding that was established in Arabia was that Mecca, the Kaaba, is dedicated as a temple of the star of Zuhl. Similarly, they believe that there is a temple in Isfahan, which is the temples of the idol worshippers. That is the second bigger temple that people would honor. The third one was in India. This is this temple of Somnath. The fourth one is in Balkh, which is in modern-day Afghanistan, and it was the temple of Nobahar. And also the fifth one was in Yemen, in Sana'a, and this was for Venus, the star of Venus, the Zuhra. And this was also called Bayt al-Ghamdan. The Bayt al-Ghamdan is also found in the story of Abraha. I'll also talk about that a little bit today when I explore that the Hindu or Indian influence in the pre-Islamic Arabia, and how much Abraha, who actually came from Africa into Yemen, was also influenced by that. And the other one was, the sixth one is in Farghana, which is in Uzbekistan, there was a temple of sun over there, and then there was a temple in China. The 7 big temples, and Mas'udi writes that these in the pre-Islamic Arabia and beyond were considered to be 7 big temples to which everybody would pay their honor. And similarly, Shahrastani writes about 7 temples. وأما بيوت الأصنام التي كانت للعرب والهند فهي البيوت السبعة المعروفة المنية على السبع الكواكب. And these were after the stars. These were because they believed in astrology. So that's why stars was a big deal for them. So according to Shahrastani, these were in Beit Faris, in Isfahan. There was a temple, and there was another one in Multan. These were astronomical evidences here, astrological evidences to them, rather. And then there was one in Somnath, the temple of Somnath in India, and then Nobahar in Balkh, Afghanistan, and Beit Ghamdan in Sana'a, Yemen, and Farghana in the Uzbekistan, and Kaba. And that was associated with the star of Zuhal, according to some of them. And just to get a little bit into the historical background, it was a man by the name of Amr, the son of Luhay, Amr ibn Luhay. He was the first person. He was so influential in Mecca that nobody would say anything to him. He was regarded as whatever he would say would be a law. He was like a head of all the priests kind of a deal. And he brought Hubal when he was traveling up north into the Syrian region, either from Amalika or people of that kind, and he brought the Hubal over to Mecca, and he ordered everybody to worship Hubal. And Hubal has a little bit of a history that we will also talk a little bit about Hubal when we start going a little bit more into idol worshipping in Mecca today. So during the time of Shaburzi al-Iktaf, this has started happening, that the people of Mecca started getting indulged into idol worshipping. And they started having all sorts of crazy ideas. Like one of the groups, as Mas'udi, right? وَقَدْ ذَهَبَ قَوْمُ أَنَّ الْبَيْتِ الْحَرَامَ هُوَ بَيْتُ الزُّهْلِ. That there was a group of people in the Arabian Peninsula that believed that Kaba is associated with the Haykal of Zuhl, or the Bayt al-Zuhl, the temple of Zuhl. And that is the reason وَإِنَّمَا طَالَ عِنْدَهُمْ بَقَى هَذَا الْبَيْتِ عَلَى مُرُورَ. And this is the reason, because of its association with Saturn, that it is what it is, and it is being taken care by the Zuhl. Astaghfirullah al-Azim. And even in India, in Hindus, they would find the importance of Saturn in their religion. As a result, since they knew that this is the temple of Saturn, they would also regard it pretty high and would pay great respect to it. And then we also have found historical evidences that, as I have told you, that at the time of Abdul Muttalib, when Zamzam was found again, we found swords that were in that empty well, and when those swords were taken out, the metal was melted and was used around the doors of the Kaaba. Those swords were actually Indian swords. So it looks like at the time of Khuza Jurhum, who were the caretaker of Kaaba, who were the one who put the swords in that dried up well and closed it up. So it is quite evident that even as far as the time of Jurhum, which is way into the BCs, way before Abdul Muttalib, even at that time, Indian swords were quite familiar to Arabs, and they would use them. So that is another evidence we find of Indian commodities being used. And some of the historians, like Abu Danaf Mas'ar bin Mahl al-Yambu'i, he writes about that these were the sword of Killah, وفي قلعة عظيمة, and that this sword was prepared. We don't really exactly know if they were prepared in some kind of a factory in Arabian Peninsula, established by Indians, or it was actually imported directly from India. There is no evidence. There is a very famous poet from Arabia called Farzdaq. He also mentions متقلدي قلعية والسوارم, and he talks about these قلعية swords as well. Anyway, so there is evidences. And also at the time of one of the sons of Harun al-Rashid, Amin and Ma'mun, there were two sons. And at the times of Ma'mun, there was a king in the Indian region who accepted Islam, and it was found that he had in his possession an idol that was big idol. It was made out of gold, and it was sitting on a big throne that was also made out of gold. So when he accepted Islam, he still, that shows you how much they honored Kaba, even when they were Hindus or Buddhist, whatever he was. Most likely he might have been Buddhist because he had links with Tibet, as mentioned in the book. So anyway, so he decided after he accepted Islam to dedicate this gold to Kaaba. So anyway, Abu al-Walid Muhammad bin Abdullah Azraqi Makki writes the details of this in his book Tarikh Makkah. Also, let's talk about the times of Abraha. Abraha, as he became in charge of Yemen, he noticed that the Arabs go to Mecca several times a year for Umrah, and especially at the time of Hajj, where they go in big numbers and there's a lot of business going in, a lot of money flowing into Mecca. So he decided that how about if I reroute all this money into Yemen? If he would ask everybody to accept Christianity, that wouldn't be a good thing and would not be accepted by all the Arabs. So he decided to build a massive temple next to an already existing temple in Sana'a in Yemen. So Bayt Ghamdan was the temple, as I told you, the 7 big temples. So he chose the site of Bayt Ghamdan, and next to the Bayt Ghamdan, he built this massive temple of Qalis, in which he used all sorts of expensive stones that were green and red and yellowish and blackish, and he put together a massive temple. And the entrance of this temple was built with very high columns that were built from wood, and these were the wood that is commonly found in India that was used. He used a lot of teak. He used a lot of Indian rosewood, which is the shisham. And in the local language, the teak wood is called the sagwan wood. So he used a lot of that wood in the construction of the temple. And apparently, and he used a lot of gold and a lot of silver, and the whole dome that was built for this temple, the chains that were coming down were built from gold. And also inside the temple, he built an idol called Ka'ib, and that was built from a wood. And this was a teak wood, and it was a lot of engraved woodwork was used within. And also the idol of the Ka'ib's wife was also built, and both of these were extremely long woods, and they were carved to build. And it looks like Ka'ib and his wife, both of these were done in a way that some historians have come to the consensus that it might have been the work of the Hindus who were settled in Yemen, because the people of Yemen were unaware of this kind of woodwork or carvings. And since Hindus were quite familiar with these kind of carvings, because they have been carving idols for a very long time. And now, let's come to some of the consensus between the Arabs and the Hindus, because they were both pagans and they were honoring each other and they were honoring each other's temples. So, of course, all over the Arabian Peninsula, different idols were getting worshipped. So we'll talk more about that today, and that's where we will close out our today's lecture. So the last part of today's lecture will be spent on the famous temples the famous idols that were worshipped in Arabia. So Qadi Sa'id bin Andalusi in Tabqat al-Umam talks about that different tribes worshipped different stars, and these stars were found in Hindu mythology as well as in pre-Islamic Arabia. Banu Himyar, who are in the Yemen, would worship sun. Banu Kinana, like they would worship other gods, but these were bigger, more important to them. Banu Kinana would worship moon. Banu Tamim would worship Al-Dibran, which is a star in the zodiac constellation of Taurus, Al-Dibran. And Banu Lakham, the Lakhmide, and the Banu Jazam, they would worship Jupiter. And Banu Tay would worship Suhail. Suhail is a star in the constellation Vela. The English name for this is Lambda Velorum. So this is worshipped by Banu Tay. And Banu Qais would worship the Sirius, Ashara. And Banu Asad would worship Atarid. Atarid is Mercury. And Quraysh, of course, had all sorts of crazy things going on in the name of paganism. And they would bring idols of anybody that they would come in contact with and becomes friends with. They would bring that idol over into the Mecca and install it. And if Quraysh and the other tribe, they part from each other, they become each other's enemy, then Quraysh would throw away their idol outside of the limits of Mecca. Crazy stuff. But yeah, they were doing that. And Banu Tamim were also involved in fire worshipping because of close relationship with the Persian Empire. And some of the famous fire worshippers that we find historically, and we find their names in the book of Sirah, was Zarara bin Hajib, and Aqra bin Habis, and Abu Aswad. These are three of the people from Banu Tamim we find in the books of Sirah, and they were actually fire worshippers. And among the Arabs, when they were worshipping idols, they had several idols like Wad, Sawa', Yaghus, Ya'uq, Nasr. They have Hubal, Uzza, Lat, Manat, several of them. So let me tell you that in Dawmat al-Jandal, there was a tribe of Banu Kalb. They were worshipping Wad. Banu Huzayl would worship Suwa'. And people in Yemen and the Banu Muzjah, they would worship Yaghuth. In Yemen, Banu Hamdan would worship Ya'uq. Himyar had Zul Kala'. These people in the Himyar will worship Nasr. People in Ta'if, the Banu Thaqif, they would worship Lat. It was a goddess. In Mecca, another goddess by the name of Uzza would be worshipped, besides other gods and goddesses, and Hubal was considered to be the biggest of all of them in the Arabia. And Banu Kinana and Banu Sulaim, they would worship Uzza, also besides the people of Quraysh. And around the Yathrib, which is modern-day Medina, Aus and Khazraj and Banu Ghatfan, they would worship the goddess Manat. And among the Arabs, Hubal was considered to be the biggest god, the biggest of all of these gods. And that's why Quraysh put Hubal on top of the rooftop of Kaba to show that it is the bigger of all. And also there was an idol of Isaf and Na'ilah. Originally, they were in front of the Kaaba, but later on, they were moved at the Mount Safa and Mount Marwa. So whenever, at the time that they would go between Safa and Marwa, they would start from Safa and they will touch the feet of Isaf. We'll go on the other side by Marwa, which touch the feet of Na'ilah, and they would do that in all 7 cycles. And this is how, and remember, there's one more thing I want to talk about. Hubal, which is the biggest of all of these idols, is believed to have 3 daughters. And these were Lat, Manat, and Uzza. Lat, which is considered to be the goddess of the underworld, which is worshipped by the people of Ta'if. Manat, which is worshipped by mainly Aus, Khazraj, and Banu Ghatfan. It is believed by them, the pre-Islamic Jahiliyyah people that this was the goddess of fate, and Uzza was believed to be the goddess of fertility and was worshipped mainly by the people of Mecca. Besides that, lots of Hindus from India and Sindh region, or it could be Jains or Buddhists, whatever they are, doesn't matter. They also had a lot of temples that were built within the India, Afghanistan region, and then as far as China and in the Arabia. So some of them are mentioned in the books. And of course, they would go in each other's temples too. And they would give sacrifices because they honor each other's temples. So Ibn Nadim in Kitab al-Fahrist, he talks about that in Hindustan, in the India, which basically the Hindustan is a much larger region than the modern day India. But anyway, he talks about that there's one of the temples of Mankir, which is Mangrur temple, in which there was 20,000 idols. And it was a massive temple, and people from all over would come and visit it. And then there was another temple in Multan, which is in modern-day Pakistan, and this was also one of those Sab'a temples. Also, and a lot of people would come and visit it. There was another one in Bamiyan in Afghanistan. There was another one in Qumar, and then which is Ras Kumari, and this was another temple that was used between India and China as a big visiting place where the people from China would visit, the people from India would also visit this, and this would create a lot of religious relations of commonality among the people of this region. So again, just wanted to give you an idea that when Islam entered in this region, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought all of these people who had all of these belief systems into the Arabian Peninsula. So we were seeing people from China, people from Indonesia, Malaysia, people from India, people from Sri Lanka, from Salandip, for people from Africa, people from Europe, people from Iran, Uzbekistan. All of these people are gathering where? Have some links with the Arabian Peninsula, one way or the other. Religious grounds, trades ground, whatever it is, so that the message of Islam in one shot could reach the entire humanity. And this kind of an arrangement was made so that when Islam comes, the message can go as far as it can go. Anyway, inshallah, we'll talk more about the relations of Arabs with Hindus in particular when they were called towards the cause of Islam. And if you look at the modern population, you will see that almost close to 1 billion people in the world are Hindus, which is 1 in every 8 people. So it's extremely important for us to capture this particular thing as well, that how Islam influenced them and how the message of Islam reached them, and how early on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made this arrangement that this message would reach them again, because Allah has always sent prophets and messengers in all the people. We have already spoken about that as well in the past. There are so many videos that we have recorded this far, and inshallah we will continue to record more as we move forward. Till next time, Assalamu alaikum.